lying. No Snapchatting. I'm not.
I'm not.
Okay.
Check.
So suspicious.
Isha, you said that everything.
No,
That's just Swathi. I was gonna try and argue. That's also me. I was gonna try and argue, but then I was like, yeah, I do.
The cathedral.
It was pretty. And who's don't
Haley Smith.
Okay. So, time starts now. As first speaker of the AF team, I strongly affirm today's resolution. So the criterion is net benefits, and for definitions, international sanctions are actions taken by countries against others for political reasons, either unilaterally or multilaterally. Yeah. Okay, so our first contention is about the economy and how it's being deteriorated by all these sanctions, by that sanction. So inflation is caused because of the disrupted what? What does it say? Supply chains. It's disrupted by supply chains and higher operating costs. Inflation went up to at least 22.2%. Prices rose 3%, and the price of vegetables 100%. Prices are unstable and badgers.
Budgets, Meilinda, budgets.
And the budgets get stretched even there. Not badgers. The official rate of reals held at 12,260, and the black market was 19,600 reals to $1. Yes.
Wait, so these are like direct effects of the sanctions, right?
Yes, to an economy. And by the way, this is from The Guardian. So 20% of the population is unemployed, and this caused a lot of suicide rates to increase, which is something you don't want. Cost of healthcare is too expensive for 40% of the population, which causes more deaths, and people won't be able to really be living as well as they could be. So my second standard of living is poor, bad, whatever. So my second contention is about civilian impact in general. So there's a lot of mass suffering and food insecurity, as I mentioned before, and there are 500,000 deaths of children under 5 because of this sanction, due to stuff like there's lack of medicine, lack of food, and all that stuff. And because of unemployment, their families aren't really able to support them, thus causing them to have less food and less medicine, therefore causing them to lose their lives way much easier. Last year, poverty rose, as I said before, a lot. So therefore, because of the sanctions which caused that change, so the price of staple food has also doubled, which is staple food stuff like bread, eggs, milk, etc. So once those prices decrease, those are foods that could easily support someone who isn't really fortunate enough to have a lot of food. So even if they just have those foods like bread, eggs, milk, etc., that's sort of enough. Yes.
Do you know if the economy was already suffering before the sanctions?
It was, but this is making it worse. Unemployment, as I said before, is going up even higher. Sorry. Just doing the same things that I did. So factory workers are also very close to the poverty line, in fact under the poverty line sometimes, by earning about $300 a month. And with the increasing food prices, increasing medicine prices, and increasing prices in general, that's not enough for them to actually have a good standard of life. There's a lot of chaos being caused also because of the sanctions. For example, the people started to protest about the real's collapse, and the police had to take the action of trying to get the people to leave by even using tear gas, which the police should not really be using on the civilians. And there, as I said before, medicine shortages, which are causing people, especially the children who are more vulnerable than the adults, to not have that health care that they really need to survive, which thus cause more deaths, and that's not a good thing. A former UN official, Dennis Halliday, says that the suffering caused by the sanctions policy has met the formal definition of genocide, because there's a lot of because these sanctions are practically responsible for killing people, destroying their families, their children, allowing their older parents to die for for lack of basic medicines and food in general. And also, I think these sanctions were supposed to try to get rid of Saddam, that guy, out of power, or at least, or something like that. I think. So the point is, it's trying to get rid of him from power, but instead it has only tightened his grip on power because the majority of the population is too busy worrying about themselves, like trying to survive, than to caring about who's in power of these things. So, and in fact, today's U.S.-led sanctions regime has killed more civilians than all the chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons used in history, according to The Guardian, which is showing how bad these sanctions are affecting people. In fact, these sanctions were supposed to only put like a small toll on Iran, not completely kill 500,000 children and kill so many people, as said in that quote. So these sanctions, all they've been doing is just causing chaos and people to be way too insecure. Way too many people are losing their lives, even though these sanctions should have just been sort of like trying to stop the government from doing harm. Yeah, no, that's not a chance. And even though these sanctions were only supposed to attack the government, this is actually attacking also the people, which it shouldn't be really impacting people because these people didn't really do anything. The innocent civilians, they haven't done anything. The ones that we're trying to punish right now is the government. So the people who are suffering, they don't deserve to lose their lives. They don't deserve to have such a low standards of living. Therefore, these sanctions, these sanctions are doing much more harm than they are good. So I strongly affirm today's resolution.
Wait, may I have a really quick question? What was your second contention?
Civilian impact.
Wait, also, question number 8. Were you gonna say?
Yeah.
He was dead.
What?
What?
Is he dead?
He's not in power anymore, that's why.
I thought he has never been in power.
But I saw on the source, it was like
He
something
was
like
in Iraq,
That's
and the U.S. removed him in
Yeah, that's in
2003.
Yeah, I was like so confused. That's why I was like, I don't know who you're
No
trying to say.
wonder! I just remember.
This is
I
Iraq.
I don't know
not
what you're
Iraq.
trying to say
I'm
right
just in
now.
Iraq and Iran.
Yeah, that's a pretty bad background.
Yeah, I'm pretty crazy.
Hooray for you,
Meilinda. Hooray for you and your team.
What is your main point?
No, it wasn't.
It was a sub point
It
that
wasn't.
should be just taken out.
Okay. I'll just address a
You're gonna
misinterpretation of information
Yeah.
on your guys' side.
You sure
I'll
you
just
use
address it
grounds?
briefly.
Okay. Are you joking?
Wait, no, let her be. That's what she deserves to be.
Alright, Claire, go.
There's a water fountain outside.
Alright,
You're
can I do
doing
my
my
time
level
to
up.
No, go on.
Okay. Time starts now. I strongly negate the resolution that the international sanctions on Iran have done more harm than good. So basically, we're debating that the sanctions have done more good than harm. Sometimes I get confused. Okay, so I'm going to first start with our contentions and then move on to refutations to our opponents' contentions because our contentions provide context for the arguments that we're going to make. So our first contention is that these sanctions actually allowed for the nuclear deal to kind of happen. So basically, a little bit of background information on that. Iran was developing basically a nuclear program that kind of went unchecked by people, or like basically unchecked by the international population, and it was pretty sketchy. So basically, it could provide dangers against like basically the international community as a whole, because obviously if a country gets nuclear weapons and tries to hide it, there's obviously like some dangers that comes with that. So basically, we're saying that many citizens' lives could have been lost had we not had these sanctions, because these sanctions actually allowed for this nuclear deal to happen. Because if we didn't impose sanctions on Iran, then they wouldn't have been incentivized to like even let us check on their nuclear programs, to even like have a negotiation, to even have any of that. Their nuclear program would have just gone on developed and unchecked by the population. So according to the Defamation League. The nuclear-armed Iran, or like if Iran is nuclearly armed, then like their aggressive foreign policy can cause them like to basically be more of a threat to the international population. And they also, even before, this is our first contention, even before so, they already had a lot of weapons that could do significant damage to the U.S. So if they basically develop like nuclear weapons, you can obviously see the detrimental effects of that. Additionally, with these sanctions, just like this is kind of a sub-point, with these sanctions, we could prevent Iran from supplying basically more weapons to terrorist groups. So also according to the Anti-Defamation League, Iran is one of the world's leading state sponsors of terrorism by supporting groups, for example, such as Hezbollah, I think I pronounced it correctly, Hamas, and other terrorist groups. And currently, Hezbollah is like actually active in a lot of conflicts we know today, like the Syrian crisis. They're fighting for the Assad side of the argument, which is conflict, which is also detrimental. So by putting these sanctions on Iran, they're inhibited from supplying more weapons to these terrorist groups. Yes.
Question for clarification: Is it like confirmed that they were supplying these weapons, or is it just could be?
Yes, according to our source, they were confirmed to be supplying weapons to these terrorist groups. But basically, Hezbollah currently is active in one of like the major crises that are happening today, also the cause of the Syrian refugee crisis, right? So we can see that if we since we put sanctions on Iran, we inhibit their ability to supply these terrible terrorist groups, such as Hezbollah, with weapons, which will make them more potent, more powerful, and more destructive in these conflicts. So just to reiterate our first contention a little bit, so we are basically putting giving Iran an incentive to let us check on their nuclear program, so they aren't planning anything scary that could potentially hurt the global community, and we are inhibiting their ability to basically sell weapons or supply weapons to terrorist groups. So thus, that leads on to our second contention, which kind of goes along with the nuclear deal a bit. So in 2013 elections, Rouhani was elected, and he's basically like a relatively moderate president, and he leans more towards democracy for Iran, and this is according to Washington Post. So basically what this means is that these sanctions have caused the people to realize that their government was corrupt, that their government had to be better than this. Like all they really had to do was allow the U.S. and basically just the global community to view the nuclear program, to basically see what they're doing and to monitor it so that it doesn't get out of control, doesn't hurt anyone. So the people saw these sanctions and they're like, this is hurting us. And like, what's causing these sanctions, right? The government refusing the nuclear deal. So thus the people are more incentivized to vote for someone who has like negotiating abilities, and basically moderate individuals such as Rouhani, who basically successfully negotiated with everyone about the nuclear deal, and that was very good, because basically what that allowed for was that Iran was under less suspicion, all that. So basically these sanctions allowed for the nuclear deal to be kind of more negotiated out. It also allowed for a more moderate and less corrupted government to take root in Iran. So onto refutation. Onto refutations. Let's not too much time on that. So the affirmatives, like two contentions are basically one and the same. The economy, generally the economy deteriorates, and that leads to the loss of health, like the loss of people in general. And there's stuff about inflation, unstable prices, and our opponents did admit that even before the sanctions, Iran's economy was already suffering. So if the cause of all this suffering, like what my opponents claim, is that the sanctions are causing all of this, is not true. It's also the government. So the government before was corrupted. The government was basically like kind of ruining the economy before. So by like implementing these sanctions, once again, we allowed for someone to be like someone more moderate to be voted into the government. Once again, he's inclined for a democracy, which is good for Iran because then they're not under a corrupted government that's going to take all their money, that's going to cause them to just keep on going like they were before. Not only that, but Iran has a better reputation with the global community, and they're less of a threat to the United States and other countries as well due to this. Because if we were to put ourselves at risk, that would be bad. So basically, we just kind of save the people with these sanctions, and we allow for the nuclear deal to happen, and that is good. And those are reputations, and
Yeah, Swathi.
Anti-swap.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here quietly. Yeah, that's true. You're actually being quiet.
That's actually really surprising.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Next one.
Oh, yeah. Alright, Swathi, you ready?
Okay. So, as the second speaker of the Firmicide, I strongly affirm today's resolution that the international sanctions on Iran have done more harm than good. So just as a brief on-time roadmap, I'm going to be going over my contentions to the next side's case, and then their reputations to our case, and then if I have time, I will be strengthening our case. So the next side's first contentions were that the sanctions allowed for the nuclear deals to happen, and how many civilians could have been saved with these sanctions, if I'm correct. So the nuclear deal even could have saved civilian lives. There are so many civilians that are dying right now. As we stated in our case, almost more than 500,000 children have died just from when these sanctions have been put in place. So these people are still suffering right now. If the nuclear deal could have saved some lives, we still know for a fact that people are suffering right now with the sanctions. So instead of going on the chance that the nuclear deal could have saved people, we have to weigh the impact of the people who are dying right now, the people who are being negatively impacted by the sanctions right now. So, as a supplement of their contention was that developing nuclear weapons is detrimental and Iran supports these terrorist groups. So the price of inhibiting these bad groups through putting sanctions on Iran is hurting the people because the term genocide is used to describe what's happening with these sanctions. So taking the terrorist groups and saying that with these sanctions Iran will be providing them weapons, it's still going to be hurting these people, whether it's through terrorism or genocide. So in our case, we're talking about the impact of the lives that are being lost right now. And even if these sanctions have the chance of stopping the terrorist groups from being supplied with weapons, it's still extremely detrimental to the people. And taking the chance of, as I mentioned before, the chance that they wouldn't be doing something, we already know for a fact that something bad is happening right now. We should be going on that instead of going on what could have happened and what could be. So their second contention was of democracy and how with the sanctions a better leader could have been put into place and a democracy could develop. And how people, so when this happened, the people saw the sanctions as hurting them and the sanctions allowed for the nuclear deal to happen as went in with their first contention. So the government is suffering right now with these sanctions though because nobody is going to be able to take power from the government if the government is suffering right now because the economy, which is a huge part of what's happening in the government, is suffering greatly because of causes my partner mentioned, and the people and law enforcement are even resorting to violent measures to keep the people under their power, and this is just really bad because the government is setting such a bad example for the people, and the people are seeing this happening, and the sanctions are just making it worse. So now I'm going to be going over the next side's refutations to our case. So they pretty much just lumped both their contentions together, and I'll be specifying that when I go to strengthen our own case. So their refutation was that sanctions aren't causing this to happen, and the government is. And their point was that there was already, the economy was already suffering before this, but yes, the economy was suffering before this, but the sanction just completely doubled, tripled the suffering that's happening because when the sanctions were put in place, there was mass suffering, food shortages, children's death, lack of healthcare, lack of medicine, and all of this. Yes.
Do you have evidence for what you stated about tripling the effects of
Well, so yeah, it's from The Guardian, but I'll just specify it again. So after the sanctions were put in place, it caused a drop in employment, a drop in the poverty, and this obviously hurts the economy. Also, inflation took place, so this is all factors that could have gone into the economy suffering. So going back to the reputation, so their reputation to our case was that the sanctions are causing this, the government is, but as we saw before, the government before when the economy is suffering, that's on the people, that's on the government. But when these sanctions were put in place, this is what was causing the economy to fail. This is what's causing the government to be bad the way they are. So sanctions are hurting the government, as I mentioned before, so I won't be going over that again, but yes.
Wait, hold on. Did you just say that the sanctions cause the government to be corrupt?
No, I'm saying that if the sanctions are what's causing it, not the government, and the sanctions are going to be hurting the government more. Does that clarify it? Okay. So now I'm going to be going over to strengthen our own case. So our first contention was of civilian impact. So all my refutations to the next side's case was that the civilian lives Oh yeah, so just going back to my reputations because I think I dropped something. So the lives are more important than what's happening with government suffering because as I mentioned before, there's 500,000 children dying directly because of these sanctions. So we have to weigh the cost of these lives to the cost of the government suffering because these lives are much more important. These are innocent people's lives who have nothing to do with what's happening in Iran right now, and they're the ones being affected by the sanctions. Maybe the bad people are being affected, but in the long run, it's going to be the innocent people who are affected, and we should take that into consideration, not just the small minority of the bad people who caused the sanctions. So, going back to our contention of civilian impact. So, as I mentioned before, civilian lives are what's being hurt right now, and nothing that the next side could say would overrule this because when the civilians die, this is what's going to cause when the civilians are hurt, this is what's going to cause the people's anger. This is what's going to cause them to be angry at the government and not want to this is what's going to cause them to be angry at the government. So just going over the points that my partner already said. So the poverty went from 22% to 40% just from the sanctions. So if the next side were to say that the sanctions weren't causing this is clearly untrue because just when the sanctions got put in place, the poverty went up 18%, and that's a very large percentage. So, also, the price of staple food also doubled, and this is huge, and my partner was only able to touch on this a little bit, but when the people aren't going to get food, they're going to die of starvation. There's going to be other suffering, and the overall quality of life is going to go down. This is something directly caused by the sanctions. So our second contention was that of the economy, and I already went over this in my first contention, so I won't go over it too much, but the economy is being extremely hurt just by the sanctions, and that's something that can overrule everything the next side has said. So as the second speaker of the firm said, I strongly affirm today's resolution. What? Yes.
As the second speaker of the negation, I strongly negate today's resolution that international sanctions against Iran have done more harm than good. So I'm going to be going af case than neg case. So their first contention was that the sanctions have harmed the economy. However, I would like to point out that they have not provided any links as to how these sanctions directly brought about a harm in the economy. They have merely said that these two things happened at the same time. We cannot, by this, assume that there was a cause and effect relationship. We just know that two things happened at the same time. They provided no links or warrants as to how sanctions have caused economic detriment or yes.
Point of clarification. So, did you realize that in our speech we mentioned that because of these sanctions that are being placed, so the government they're like put on the government, so the value of money is going down, and because the value of money is going down, all these prices are going up and there's inflation.
Okay, I didn't really get that before. Okay, so thank you for that clarification. So yeah, forget what I said. Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to be going to their second contention now. I'll go back to the first later if I have time. So their second contention was that of civilians and civilians being harmed and these innocent people who are affected. However, we would like to point out that what we have on our case is the impacts of nuclear war. So if Iran had been able to continue with its nuclear program in secrecy in such a tension-ridden area as the Middle East, this could have untold impacts on the global society. Imagine if these nuclear weapons had been somehow engaged in Syria, or used against Israel, or used in any one of a number of conflicts threatening the Middle East right now. The impact this could have. What we are seeing here is global extinction. That would be a possibility. What we would see is a tremendous loss of life that has been prevented because of the sanctions that clearly outweighs whatever, I'll take your question later if I have time. I'm sorry. Whatever the AF says about how they've saved lives. We believe that we win on the point of lives because of magnitude. Our impact on that outweighs theirs. Okay, so then they claim that what this leads to is people being angry at the government. However, we believe this is a good thing because this means protest and agitation towards a government more willing to compromise and work within democracy. So this is indeed a good thing. So I'm going to go back to their first contention, which was of economy and how this was leading to a loss of life. However, we have shown already that we have outweighed the lives that were affected by the deal, by the lives that have been saved. Lives affected by sanction, by the lives that have been saved by the nuclear deal. So we believe that we've outweighed this. Moreover, we have shown that the nuclear deal the sanctions have paved the way for a more pro-democracy government. And in a place where there is no democracy, the effects to the economy can be as crippling as if there were tremendous sanctions imposed. So an authoritarian government that does not believe in democracy is just as harmful to the economy. It would create just as big of a black market. So instead, sanctions have led to a more democratic future. So what am I saying? I don't even know what I'm saying. Okay, so yeah, a bad government could be just as harmful to the economy as sanctions, and sanctions have led to a better government. So we believe this will be beneficial to the economy in the long run, compared to a life where the sanctions would never have happened in the first place. So now I'm going to go to our case. So our first contention was how this allowed for the nuclear deal to happen because sanctions provided an incentive. So they responded saying that people are dying and suffering right now, and even if we prevent people from harming bad groups, what this will ultimately harm is civilians. However, we have shown that the impacts of a nuclear deal are so tremendous that they outweigh any impact that AF may have on lives, because we've clearly prevented more deaths through the nuclear deal, and which happened because of sanctions. So they claim that even if we're preventing some terrorists from getting weapons, who's ultimately harmed is the civilians. However, imagine what would happen if these weapons were used in Syria, if Hezbollah got these weapons, if Hamas did. What kind of global impact would that happen? This would clearly shape the entire scale of global politics. So this outweighs the impacts of civilians being harmed. So our second contention was that because of the sanctions in the 2013 elections, Rouhani was able to be elected. They weren't really clear with their response to that argument, saying that the government is suffering because of sanctions, meaning no one can take power. I was not very clear with that, so I'm just going to clarify our own point, which was that Rouhani, who's a cleric and who's more moderate compared to other people who were looking to gain power, he was a skilled negotiator, and he won on the promise that he would be lifting these sanctions, and so he was more willing to work within democracy. So, as we both agreed that sanctions created government distrust, which meant that in this election, people moved towards a more democratic stance. So they went for a government that would compromise instead of blatantly refusing on ideology. They voted for Rouhani, who negotiates, and in this they placed a vote for democracy. They placed a vote for a better economy in the long run. So we believe that the sanctions have done more good than harm because they have prevented the impacts of nuclear war, especially in the Middle East, and they have facilitated the growth of democracy in Iran. So for these impacts, I strongly encourage a negative vote.
They just left that up. We should probably fix that.
Are we? I was thinking we should keep that out. Because I wasn't get really mad.
Well, she's not gonna know who it is.
It says horny on the board.
Yeah, but they're
We're
not
not
gonna
gonna
know
know
who
who
it
drew
is.
it. Yeah.
We can fix
Alright,
this.
Claire, go.
You can say they're happy.
Yeah. So time starts now. So this is a voter issue speech. It's basically a speech where you, judge, should vote. I'm basically explaining why you, judge, should vote for the negation team in this debate. So I have a couple of voter issues go for a bit of basically explaining how many impacts we have as compared to the affirmative team. And yeah, with that, I'm just going to start. So the criterion set for today was net benefits, and I'm just going to go over how we adhere to these net benefits, these impacts, better than the affirmative team. So essentially what the affirmative team is saying, what they're focusing on is economic detrimental effects of these sanctions within Iran. Yeah, and the bad economy is not unique because it can't be directly linked to the sanctions, as my partner had stated previously, I think. So basically, essentially their argument was that the sanctions are causing the bad economy, which causes the people to die, and that's genocide. However, I'd like to state that with the sanctions, that allowed for, in 2013, for Rouhani to be elected. As my partner had clearly stated, she linked all of this into the fact that the civilians, due to these sanctions, viewed their government as less basically substantial to run the country, So basically, by having these sanctions in, there's an incentive to basically improve the government instead of cower away. There's an incentive to basically vote for someone who can get rid of these sanctions, who can help the people and not be corrupted. So as we can see, that clearly helped the sanctions clearly provided incentive, as this moderate man was elected and is in support of democracy, and even won on the fact that he said he'll get rid of the sanctions. So we can see how we got rid of the corrupted government that was causing the bad economy in the first place. Basically setting standards for the future in which there's democracy and basically everyone's rights are considered, right? So that's one of our impacts. So now we're gonna take a step back and look at the entire world, right? So our opponents focus on the economic effects in Iran. We focus on possible nuclear war that could have happened to the entire planet. So we're basically saying that Iran, with its unchecked nuclear program that's kind of growing without any monitoring from other countries, can cause tension, as my partner stated. This tension, in turn, can cause basically aggression and fear, which then would lead to a war. Because if the U.S. or Europe or anyone in the Middle East, for that matter, are concerned for their lives because Iran is developing a nuclear program, and clearly nuclear weapons are extremely detrimental and very dangerous, then a conflict could have ensued in which like basically nukes were thrown everywhere and everyone dies. And that is clearly an issue because as we can see, everyone dies. That is a huge impact in this debate, and this is like another reason why the negation team should win this debate, because once again, we're looking at the safety of the world, right? And we're not just looking at the small, like basically the impact only in Iran. We're looking at the entire world, basically spreading our impacts there. So also another thing about lives, like other than the ones in Iran, we're not ignoring the ones in Iran, we're just basically comparing the impacts that could have happened either way, is the terrorist groups that Iran was supporting. By basically placing sanctions on Iran, we make it less likely for them to basically supply the terrorist groups that are currently involved in conflicts such as the Syrian crisis, which we know is a huge crisis and many refugees are just flooding out the area. We could have, by enforcing this nuclear deal, by giving an incentive for Iran to agree with and negotiate with us, we're able to possibly even avoid like them supplying these terrorist groups unmonitored with nuclear weapons that they could have just destroyed Syria outright, which is bad. So, thus, we can see all these impacts that the negation team has that relate to the entire world, that relate to terrorist groups, that relate to basically all of that. That's why we adhere to net benefits better, and that's what you vote for us.
Yeah, that's why it sounds so familiar. Yeah, I know, I had it.
Well, I can sit in the front and keep your flow. Because you should be flowing this speech, not sitting lazily in the back of the room. No.
What? Okay. So time starts now. Now I'd like to go over voter issues. So first of all, our first voter issue will be on magnitude. So the AF team is focusing on civilian lives right now, and so if you think about it, the Meg team never specified how many weapons they had and how big these weapons were. That was like a question that they didn't answer, by the way.
Not really new information. Order, this is a new argument. Say you already never specified. Because you didn't ask my question.
What? Did you never ask?
I did.
Wait.
But you told me to sit down.
I said it. Going me.
She said she didn't.
Screw that. I'll go later.
Point under consideration.
Okay. So neither. Because it's considered. Okay, so the point is, come on, I can say it.
Just say it.
Oh, okay. So because they never specify the size or amount of these weapons, so the AF team has already mentioned from this quote how how the people are suffering right now is equivalent to the definition of genocide. Genocide is just as bad as terrorism because just as many people are suffering in a terrible way. Yeah. So if you think about it, no, I'll get back to that later. I'll expand on that later. I'll just move on to my second point. Yeah. So to do a quick comparison, so on the AF side, right now we're considering how they're. By the way, they sort of dropped their genocide point thing. So just take that into consideration. They failed to realize that, or right now, just somewhat acknowledging that the people right now are suffering to the definition of practically genocide, which is something bad, and just as bad as terrorism, because people are suffering in a really bad way. I found my points. Okay, and so the Leg team is talking about how the people are going to be in better positions now. They have a democracy. They're going to have their lives even better because they have a democracy, which gets all their rights and stuff. But right now, the people are suffering, and rude. I lost my. government was bad, but nowadays sanctions are making it even worse and causing people to go into a situation where they're suffering even more than they were already suffering. So now that they're suffering even more, that's not very positive, therefore it's not enough. So
Where are you at?
I confused myself. So yeah, people are suffering even more now with these sanctions going on. So these sanctions are not doing any good because people and the innocent people are suffering even though they really didn't do anything. Really, the government's the only group that did something bad per se. So why should these innocent people need to suffer on behalf of the government? So, which is not fair. Therefore, they should not be suffering on behalf of the government. Yeah, that's showing that sanctions are really just doing more harm. Maybe not directly to the government, obviously. Well, actually, it is doing harm to the government because it's doing harm to the economy, which the government. Yeah. But yeah.
I lost all my thoughts. I disappeared. I went somewhere really different color pens. I have a point. It's supposed to.
35 seconds to remember.
Well, okay, screw that. So the point is, these sanctions are doing more harm than good because they're making more people suffer. They're making people suffer even more than they were already suffering, which is not something we want. And they've already reached a point of suffering where it's practically called genocide, which is just as bad as terrorism. I've been saying this entire speech.
Yes, preach. You need it, right?
Yeah.
Ouch! Ouch! Swathi, yes.
Hard.
You could be done now.
I had
When
other
you think
points,
that
but I
Swathi's
also
complimenting you, she's